The champagne glass slipped from Melissa's perfectly manicured fingers as my words cut through the elegant buzz of conversation at the promotion party. The crystal shattered against the marble floor of the Grand Metropolitan Hotel ballroom, sending fragments scattering like her carefully constructed facade. Every head in the room turned toward us, drawn by the sharp sound and the sudden silence that followed my calm, measured response to her earlier introduction of me as David's ex-wife to the board of directors. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I'm sorry, I said with a smile that never reached my eyes, my voice carrying just enough volume for the nearby executives to hear clearly. I believe there's been a misunderstanding. You're thinking of your own employment status. As of Monday morning, you'll be the former employee. The color drained from her face as she processed what I'd just said, her confident smirk dissolving into something approaching panic. She glanced frantically toward my husband David, seeking rescue from the man she'd been openly flirting with all evening, but he was frozen in place, his own champagne glass halfway to his lips, finally beginning to understand that the quiet wife he'd been taking for granted had just orchestrated something far beyond his comprehension. The journey to that moment of perfect revenge began 3 years earlier, on what should have been one of the happiest days of my professional life. I had just been offered a senior partnership at Whitmore Associates, one of the most prestigious accounting firms in the city, after years of working 16-hour days and sacrificing weekends to prove myself in a male-dominated industry. My expertise in forensic accounting had helped the firm recover millions in fraudulent assets, and my innovative audit techniques had been adopted as standard practice across their entire operation. I was 34 years old, with a master's degree in accounting from Northwestern, a CPA license that had taken me 3 attempts to earn while working full-time, and a reputation for being able to find financial discrepancies that others missed. My colleagues respected my analytical mind, my clients trusted my discretion, and my superiors valued my ability to turn complex financial puzzles into clear, actionable intelligence. When I called David to share the news about my partnership offer, I expected celebration. Instead, I got concern disguised as practicality. "That's wonderful, honey," he said, but I could hear the hesitation in his voice even through the phone. "But are you sure you want to take on that much responsibility right now? We've been talking about starting a family, and senior partners work even longer hours than associates." I was standing in my corner office, looking out at the Chicago skyline, holding an offer letter that represented everything I'd worked toward for the past decade. The partnership would triple my salary, give me equity in the firm, and establish me as one of the youngest senior partners in the company's history. But David's response made it clear that he saw my success as a complication rather than an achievement. "We can discuss the timing," I replied carefully, already feeling the familiar weight of having to justify my ambitions to the man who was supposed to be my biggest supporter. "The partnership doesn't start until next quarter, so we have time to figure out how to balance everything." "Of course we'll figure it out," David said, his tone brightening with the kind of enthusiasm that always made me suspicious. "You know I support your career completely. It's just that Johnson & Associates is going through some major changes right now, and I might be up for the regional director position. It would be nice if one of us could focus on that without worrying about the other person's crazy schedule." Johnson & Associates was the marketing firm where David worked as an account manager, a position he'd held for the past 5 years without any significant advancement. He was competent at his job, well-liked by clients and colleagues, but he lacked the strategic vision and analytical skills that distinguished exceptional employees from adequate ones. The regional director position he mentioned was the same promotion he'd been almost getting for the past 2 years, always just out of reach due to some reorganization, budget constraint, or newly hired external candidate. That evening, over dinner at the expensive Italian restaurant David had chosen to celebrate my partnership offer, the conversation continued in the same vein. He ordered an expensive bottle of wine and spent the first 20 minutes talking about his own projects, his potential promotion, and his ideas for how we should quote, leverage this opportunity to really establish ourselves professionally. "I've been thinking," he said as we waited for our entrees, swirling his wine with the practiced motion of someone who'd learned to appreciate fine dining during his fraternity days at a private college his parents had funded. "Maybe this is the perfect time for you to transition into something more flexible. Your forensic accounting skills would be incredibly valuable as an independent consultant. You could work with smaller firms, set your own schedule, maybe focus on cases that don't require as much travel. I set down my fork and studied my husband's face, searching for any sign that he understood what he was suggesting. David was handsome in a conventional way, with sandy brown hair that always looked perfectly styled and blue eyes that had initially attracted me with their apparent sincerity. He came from a comfortable middle-class family in Wisconsin, had played tennis in college, and possessed the kind of easy confidence that opened doors in professional settings. We'd met 4 years earlier at a networking event for young professionals, where he'd approached me with a joke about how accounting must be more exciting than marketing since I was the only person at the party who looked like I actually enjoyed talking about work. His attention had been flattering, his interest in my career seemingly genuine, and his ambition apparently complementary to my own. But sitting across from him that night, watching him casually suggest that I abandon the partnership I'd spent years earning so that I could be more available to support his hypothetical promotion, I began to see patterns I'd been ignoring. David's support for my career had always come with subtle conditions. He celebrated my successes, but only when they didn't overshadow his own achievements. He encouraged my ambitions, but always with suggestions about how I could pursue them in ways that wouldn't interfere with his priorities. The partnership at Whitmore isn't just about money or prestige, I said carefully, testing whether he would hear the importance in my voice. It's about building something significant. The forensic accounting division is expanding into corporate intelligence and fraud prevention. I'd be leading a team that could genuinely impact how businesses protect themselves from financial crimes. David nodded enthusiastically, the way he always did when he wanted to appear supportive, while completely missing the point. That sounds amazing, and I'm sure you'd be incredible at it. I just think we need to be strategic about timing. If I get the regional director position, we'd have enough financial security for you to be more selective about the projects you take on. You could build your own practice, be your own boss, have the flexibility to travel when you want to, rather than when some client demands it. The phrase financial security particularly stung, since I was already earning significantly more than David and had been contributing disproportionately to our household expenses for the past 2 years. But pointing that out would have made me seem ungrateful for his hypothetical future earnings, and petty about money, 2 accusations he'd leveled at me before when I'd tried to discuss our financial imbalance. I accepted the partnership at Whitmore Associates the following Monday, but the pay?
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story.
Conversation with David had planted a seed of doubt that would grow over the following months. Not doubt about my decision, which I knew was correct both professionally and financially, but doubt about whether my husband truly understood or supported the woman he'd married. The first sign of real trouble came 6 weeks into my new role as senior partner, when David announced that he'd invited his boss and several key clients to a dinner party at our house without consulting me. He presented it as a spontaneous opportunity to make a good impression, but I quickly realized he'd been planning the event for weeks, assuming I would automatically prioritize his networking needs over my own schedule. "I know you're busy with the new position," he said when I pointed out that I had a critical client presentation the following day and would need the evening to prepare. "But this could really make the difference for my promotion. Henderson specifically asked about meeting you, and I think he's impressed that I'm married to a senior partner at Whitmore." The way he said it made it clear that my professional success had value to him primarily as a reflection of his own good judgment in choosing a successful wife. I was an asset to be displayed rather than a partner to be consulted, and my actual work was less important than my availability to enhance his professional image. I rearranged my schedule, postponed my client preparation, and spent the evening playing the perfect hostess while David held court about marketing strategies and industry trends. I smiled at the appropriate moments, asked engaging questions about their work, and made sure everyone's wine glass stayed full while mentally rehearsing the presentation I should have been preparing. The dinner party was a success from David's perspective. His boss complimented him on his, quote, brilliant wife, and made encouraging comments about leadership potential. But I spent the following day delivering a presentation that was competent rather than exceptional, missing opportunities to showcase innovative approaches that could have secured additional business for my firm. That pattern repeated itself throughout my first year as senior partner. David's career needs consistently took precedence over my own work, justified by an increasingly elaborate framework of reasoning about mutual support and strategic thinking. When I had to attend important industry conferences, David would schedule competing social obligations and express disappointment that I was prioritizing work over our relationship. When potential clients wanted to meet for weekend dinners, David would mention his own networking events and suggest that we should be more balanced in our professional commitments. The most frustrating aspect was how reasonable his requests always sounded in isolation. Of course, spouses should support each other's careers. Obviously, we needed to maintain our social relationships and community connections. Naturally, we should coordinate our schedules to avoid conflicts whenever possible. But the coordination always seemed to flow in one direction, with my flexibility expected and his commitments treated as immutable. Meanwhile, David's promotion to regional director remained perpetually just out of reach. There were budget freezes, organizational restructuring, and changes in leadership that delayed decisions. New candidates emerged from other offices, external hires were brought in for consideration, and the timeline kept shifting in ways that required him to work longer hours and travel more frequently. I supported him through each disappointment, listened to his frustrations about office politics and unfair treatment, and offered practical advice about how to position himself more effectively for future opportunities. But I also began to notice that his setbacks often coincided with increased criticism of my own career choices. When he was passed over for promotion the first time, David suggested that my frequent business travel was creating stress that affected his performance. When a younger colleague was hired for a position he'd wanted, he wondered aloud whether my success was making him seem less impressive to his superiors. When his boss made comments about work-life balance, David interpreted them as criticism of our dual-career lifestyle and pressure for me to scale back my professional involvement. The conversation that changed everything happened on a rainy Tuesday evening in November, exactly 18 months after I'd started my senior partnership. David came home from work with news that the regional director position had been eliminated entirely as part of a company-wide restructuring. Instead of a promotion, he was being offered a lateral move to the client relations team, with responsibilities that would require significantly more travel but no increase in salary. "I think I should take it," he said as we sat in our living room, him with a beer and me with a stack of case files I'd brought home to review. The client relations team reports directly to the national office, so there are better opportunities for advancement. And honestly, I think the change of pace might be good for both of us. I looked up from the financial documents I was analyzing, a complex fraud case involving multiple shell companies and offshore accounts that required careful attention to detail. "What do you mean, both of us?" "Well, the client relations position requires a lot of entertaining. Business dinners, corporate events, industry conferences where spouses are expected to attend. It would be a great opportunity for you to meet potential clients for your consulting practice." There it was again, the assumption that I would abandon my partnership to become an independent consultant, presented as if it were an opportunity rather than a demotion. But this time, David was being more explicit about his expectations. He wanted a wife who could enhance his professional image through social functions and networking events, not a partner with her own demanding career. "David, I'm not starting a consulting practice," I said, setting down my files to give him my full attention. "I'm building the forensic accounting division at Whitmore. We're developing new methodologies that could revolutionize how corporations detect and prevent financial fraud. This isn't something I can do part-time or as a side project." His expression shifted in a way I'd learned to recognize over the past year. It was the look he got when he was about to explain why my perspective was naive or impractical, usually followed by suggestions about how I could modify my goals to be more compatible with his needs. "I understand that the work is important to you," he said, with the careful patience of someone explaining something obvious to a stubborn child. "But we need to think about this strategically. The client relations position could lead to a VP role within 2 years. With that kind of income security, you'd have the freedom to pursue the projects that really interest you without worrying about billing hours or office politics." "I'm already earning more than a VP position would pay," I pointed out, though I knew the conversation wasn't really about money. "And I'm not worried about billing hours or office politics. I'm one of the people who sets policy in both of those areas." David's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, a sign that I'd violated the unspoken rule about comparing our salaries. He'd never explicitly asked me to downplay my earnings, But he'd made it clear through subtle reactions that direct comparisons made him uncomfortable. "It's not just about the money," he said, his tone carrying a slight edge. "It's about building something together. Right now, we're both so focused on our individual careers that we're like roommates who happen to share a bank account. When was the last time we took a real vacation? When did we last host a dinner party that wasn't about work? When do we even have time to talk about starting a family?" The family conversation was his strongest weapon, and he deployed it whenever other arguments failed to gain traction. We discussed having children in abstract terms throughout our marriage, but every time the topic became concrete, David found reasons why the timing wasn't quite right. My career was too demanding, his career was too uncertain, our financial situation needed to be more stable, our relationship needed more attention. Now he was using the possibility of future children as leverage to pressure me into scaling back my current success, framing his professional needs as family planning and my career achievements as obstacles to domestic happiness. "We can build something together without me sabotaging my career," I replied, though I was beginning to doubt whether David actually wanted to build anything together that didn't center primarily around his own ambitions. "Taking the client relations position doesn't require me to leave my partnership. We can coordinate our schedules, support each other's work, and still have time for personal priorities." "I know you think that," David said, and the condescending tone made me want to throw my case files at his head. "But you're not seeing the bigger picture. The client relations role isn't just about my career. It's about positioning both of us for long-term success. The networking opportunities alone would be invaluable for your forensic accounting work." The conversation continued for another hour, circling through the same arguments with increasing frustration on both sides. David seemed genuinely convinced that his plan made sense for both of us, while I became increasingly certain that he fundamentally misunderstood both my work and my goals. By the time we went to bed, nothing had been resolved, but I'd gained clarity about something I'd been avoiding for months. My husband didn't want a partner. He wanted a supporting character in his own professional story, someone successful enough to reflect well on his judgment, but flexible enough to prioritize his needs above her own achievements. The woman he'd fallen in love with was the ambitious analyst who impressed his friends, but the woman he wanted to stay married to was someone who would channel that ambition into supporting his career rather than building her own. David took the client relations position, and I continued building the forensic accounting division at Whitmore. For a few months, we maintained the illusion that both decisions could coexist successfully. He traveled more frequently, but I used the time to focus on work without the constant pressure to coordinate social obligations. He attended industry events that I was too busy to join, while I developed new audit techniques that required intensive research and client consultation. The problem was that success in client relations required exactly the kind of social support that David had been requesting from me for months. Corporate entertaining wasn't just about business meetings. It involved dinners with spouses, weekend retreats with families, and industry events where personal relationships determined professional opportunities. David's new role demanded a wife who could serve as a social asset, and I was increasingly unavailable for that function. The first major conflict came when David was invited to a client retreat in Palm Springs, a long weekend event where Johnson & Associates' most important accounts would be entertained with golf, spa treatments, and elaborate dinners. Spouses were specifically included in the invitation, and David's boss had made it clear that attendance was essentially mandatory for anyone serious about advancement. "I know the timing is terrible," David said when he told me about the retreat, scheduled for the same weekend as a critical client presentation I'd been preparing for weeks. "But this is exactly the kind of opportunity I was talking about. The clients will be making decisions about their next year's marketing budgets, and the relationships we build at this retreat will determine who gets the biggest accounts." I looked at my calendar, mentally calculating whether there was any way to rearrange the client presentation. The case involved a Fortune 500 company that suspected embezzlement by a senior executive, and the evidence I'd uncovered could either clear the suspect or result in criminal charges. The presentation wasn't something that could be postponed or delegated to another team member. "I can't reschedule the client meeting," I said, already anticipating David's reaction. "We're presenting findings in a potential criminal case. The client has already coordinated with law enforcement, and any delay could compromise the investigation." David's expression went through a familiar progression: disappointment, frustration, And then the carefully controlled anger that appeared whenever my work conflicted with his needs. Elena, this is important. I'm not asking you to skip a regular business meeting. This retreat could determine my entire career trajectory. And my presentation could determine whether someone goes to prison for stealing millions of dollars, I replied, though I knew the comparison would only make things worse. David had never understood that my work often involved legal consequences that made rescheduling impossible. There will be other cases, he said, confirming my prediction. There won't be other opportunities like this retreat. I'm competing with guys who have wives that prioritize their husbands' careers. If I show up alone, while everyone else brings their spouses, it sends a message about my commitment and stability. The conversation escalated from there, touching on themes that had become depressingly familiar over the past year. David accused me of caring more about work than our marriage. I pointed out that he'd never asked me to skip work events when his schedule was flexible. He argued that his career needed more support because he was at a critical juncture. I mentioned that my career was actually generating more income and had clearer advancement opportunities. That last point was a mistake. David's face flushed with the kind of anger he usually kept carefully controlled, and for a moment I saw past his practiced charm to something uglier underneath. "You know what, Elena?" he said, his voice quiet but carrying unmistakable hostility. "Maybe the problem isn't our schedules. Maybe the problem is that you've become the kind of person who thinks everything revolves around your work. You've gotten so successful that you can't see past your own priorities anymore." The accusation stung because it contained just enough truth to be devastating. I had become more focused on work over the past year. But that was largely because work was the only place where my achievements were celebrated rather than resented. At Whitmore, my innovations were implemented, and my expertise was valued. At home, my success seemed to create problems that required constant management and apology. "I think the problem is that you want a wife who doesn't have her own career goals," I replied, finally saying what I'd been thinking for months. "You liked the idea of being married to a successful woman, but you don't like the reality of what that actually requires." David stared at me for a long moment, and I could see him calculating whether to escalate the argument or retreat to safer ground. He chose retreat, switching to the wounded tone that he used when he wanted to position himself as the victim of my unreasonable demands. "I never said I didn't want you to have career goals," he said, his voice carrying just enough hurt to make me feel guilty for attacking him. "I just think we should support each other. When you need me to attend your work functions, I'm there. When you need me to network with your colleagues, I do it gladly. I just want the same consideration." It was a masterful reframing that made my work commitments seem selfish, while positioning his career needs as requests for mutual support. The problem was that David's attendance at my work functions usually involved him charming my colleagues while contributing nothing substantive to business discussions, while his requests for my support required me to sacrifice significant professional opportunities. But pointing that out would have made me seem ungrateful and petty, so I agreed to try to find a compromise solution. I spent the next week attempting to reschedule the client presentation, exploring whether a colleague could handle it, and investigating alternative arrangements that might allow me to attend at least part of the Palm Springs retreat. None of the alternatives worked. The client was inflexible about timing, my colleagues lacked the specialized knowledge to present the findings effectively, and the retreat schedule didn't allow for partial attendance. I delivered the presentation as originally planned, helping to secure evidence that led to the executive's arrest and the recovery of over $8 million in stolen funds. David attended the retreat alone and spent the following week making pointed comments about how the other wives had contributed to successful client relationships through their social skills and professional insights. He didn't mention that several of those wives were accomplished professionals in their own right, or that their ability to attend the retreat might have been facilitated by careers that offered more flexibility than senior partnership at a major accounting firm. The dynamic that emerged from the Palm Springs conflict became the template for our interactions over the following months. David would receive invitations to important events that required spousal attendance. I would be unavailable due to work commitments that couldn't be rescheduled. He would attend alone while I handled professional responsibilities that often resulted in significant achievements for my firm. Rather than celebrating my successes or acknowledging the importance of my work, David began treating my achievements as obstacles to overcome rather than accomplishments to share. When I was featured in a prominent industry magazine for developing innovative fraud detection techniques, he mentioned that the article made him look bad at work functions, where other husbands could boast about their wives' support for their careers. When I received a prestigious award for my contributions to forensic accounting, he suggested that we should be more modest about my professional recognition to avoid making other couples uncomfortable. The message was becoming clear. My success was acceptable as long as it remained secondary to his needs and didn't interfere with his professional aspirations. But I was reaching a point in my career where that kind of subordination wasn't just personally frustrating, it was professionally damaging. As the senior partner responsible for the forensic accounting division, I needed to be visible in industry circles, available for high-profile cases, and responsive to client demands that didn't conform to traditional business hours. The work required travel, evening meetings, weekend research, and the kind of total professional commitment that David found increasingly threatening to his own career plans. The situation reached a breaking point during a period when Johnson & Associates was being considered for a major contract with a pharmaceutical company. The potential client wanted a marketing team that could demonstrate stability, creativity, and strong community connections. David's boss had made it clear that the personal impressions made during the selection process would be as important as the professional proposals. David was invited to a series of social events designed to let the potential client evaluate Johnson & Associates' team in informal settings. The events included a cocktail party, a charity golf tournament, and an elegant dinner at the country club where the pharmaceutical company's executives were members. All three events specifically included spouses, and David's attendance at previous social functions had been noted and appreciated by his superiors. "This is it," David told me when he received the invitations, his excitement genuine and infectious. "If we land this contract, I'll be promoted to account director within 6 months. The pharmaceutical industry is expanding into new markets, and whoever manages this relationship will basically be writing their own ticket for the next 5 years." I wanted to be excited for him, and part of me genuinely was. David had been working toward this kind of opportunity for years, and I knew how much the promotion would mean to his self-esteem and professional confidence. But I also knew that my attendance at all three events would require me to cancel or delegate responsibilities that could significantly impact my own career trajectory. The timing was particularly problematic because I was in the final stages of negotiating a consulting contract with a federal agency that investigated financial crimes. The contract would establish Whitmore Associates as a preferred vendor for government forensic accounting work, potentially generating millions in revenue while positioning our firm as a leader in public sector financial investigation. The negotiations required my personal attention because they involved highly sensitive discussions about methodologies, security clearances, and the technical specifications that would differentiate our proposal from competitors. Missing key meetings or appearing unavailable during the selection process could easily cost us the contract, and I was the only team member with the specialized knowledge required to navigate the complex procurement requirements. "I can probably attend the cocktail party and the dinner," I told David after reviewing my schedule and identifying potential conflicts. "But the golf tournament is scheduled for the same day as my final presentation to the Federal Procurement Committee. That meeting has been scheduled for months, and there's no flexibility in the timing." David's reaction was swift and brutal. "Elena, you cannot be serious. We're talking about 3 events over 2 weeks, 3 opportunities for me to demonstrate that I have the kind of stable, supportive marriage that major clients want to see in their account management team. And you're going to skip the golf tournament for a government meeting?" "It's not just a government meeting," I replied, though I could already see that the distinction wouldn't matter to him. "It's the culmination of 8 months of work on a contract that could transform our firm's relationship with federal agencies. If we get this contract, it establishes us as the premier provider of forensic accounting services for criminal investigations. And if I get this promotion, it establishes me as someone who can manage major accounts and build lasting client relationships," David shot back. "The difference is that your contract involves working with bureaucrats who care about technical specifications, while my promotion involves working with people who care about personal relationships and social compatibility." The implicit comparison stung because it revealed how David truly viewed our respective careers. My work with government agencies was dismissed as bureaucratic technicality, while his client relations role was elevated as sophisticated relationship management. My expertise in financial crimes was reduced to technical specifications, while his social skills were positioned as genuine business acumen. "Those bureaucrats are FBI agents and federal prosecutors," I said, letting my frustration show for the first time in months. "The technical specifications are methodologies that help solve major financial crimes. The work I'm doing has put embezzlers in prison and recovered hundreds of millions in stolen assets." David's expression shifted to the wounded patience that appeared whenever I defended my work too vigorously. "I'm not diminishing what you do, Elena. I'm just saying that we need to think about what's best for our future as a couple. Your contract will still be there if you miss one meeting. My promotion opportunity won't." The conversation continued for hours, with David becoming increasingly frustrated by my unwillingness to prioritize his career needs, and me becoming increasingly resentful of his assumption that my professional commitments were negotiable while his were absolute. By the time we went to bed, nothing had been resolved, but I'd made a decision that would change everything. I was going to attend all 3 social events with David, presenting myself as the supportive wife that his career apparently required. But I was also going to document every sacrifice, every professional opportunity that I abandoned for his benefit, and every way that our marriage had become a zero-sum competition, where my success was treated as his failure. I didn't yet know what I would do with that documentation, but I was beginning to understand that I needed insurance against a future where David's gratitude for my sacrifices might prove as temporary as his respect for my achievements. The cocktail party was held at an elegant downtown hotel, in a rooftop venue that offered spectacular views of the city skyline. I wore a navy blue dress that David had specifically requested, something professional enough to indicate that I had my own career, but not so striking that I might overshadow his interactions with potential clients. The pharmaceutical company executives were exactly what I'd expected: confident, well-educated professionals who'd built successful careers in a highly competitive industry. David introduced me to everyone as his wife Elena, mentioning that I was a senior partner at Whitmore Associates, but focusing primarily on how proud he was to have such an accomplished woman supporting his career. The conversations were pleasant but predictable, with most people asking polite questions about my work before transitioning to discussions of David's role in the marketing campaign they were considering. I played my part perfectly, demonstrating just enough professional knowledge to be impressive, while deferring to David's expertise about marketing strategy and client relations. I laughed at appropriate moments, asked engaging questions about their business challenges, and made the kind of subtle personal connections that would help David stand out from other candidates for the account. But I also paid attention to details that David missed. The pharmaceutical executives were particularly interested in compliance issues, risk management, and the kind of financial oversight that could protect them from regulatory problems. Several of them mentioned concerns about corporate fraud, internal controls, and the need for better audit procedures to prevent the kinds of scandals that had plagued other companies in their industry. Their interests aligned perfectly with my expertise in forensic accounting, but David either didn't recognize the connection or chose not to highlight it. Instead, he focused on traditional marketing approaches, brand positioning, market research, and advertising strategies that would increase product awareness and consumer adoption. After the party, as we drove home through the quiet downtown streets, I mentioned the opportunities I'd observed for connecting my forensic accounting work with their compliance needs. "Did you notice how many times they brought up fraud prevention?" I asked, genuinely curious about whether David had picked up on the same themes. There might be ways to integrate financial oversight services with the marketing campaign, especially if they're launching new products that require regulatory approval. David glanced at me with a mixture of appreciation and concern. "That's really insightful, Elena, but I don't think this is the right time to pitch additional services. Johnson & Associates is competing for a specific marketing contract, and introducing other elements might complicate the decision-making process." His response revealed something important about how he viewed our respective professional contributions. My insights were valuable when they supported his existing plans, but they became complications when they suggested alternative approaches that might require him to share credit or acknowledge expertise beyond his own specialty. The charity golf tournament was held at an exclusive country club that required membership recommendations and had a waiting list measured in years rather than months. I'd never played golf at a competitive level, but I'd learned the basics during college and could handle the social aspects of a charity event without embarrassing myself or David. The format was a scramble tournament where teams of 4 players competed for prizes while raising money for a local children's hospital. David and I were paired with 2 pharmaceutical executives and their spouses, creating opportunities for casual conversation during the 5-hour event. I'd specifically rearranged my schedule to attend the tournament, canceling the federal procurement meeting that could have secured the government contract for Whitmore Associates. The meeting had been rescheduled for the following week, but the delay meant that our firm would be presenting after 2 competitors, potentially at a disadvantage in terms of timing and client attention. The sacrifice felt particularly acute because the golf tournament turned out to be exactly the kind of social networking that David excelled at naturally. He was charming without being overwhelming, knowledgeable about golf without being condescending to less skilled players, and genuinely interested in the charitable cause that the event supported. His interactions with the pharmaceutical executives were masterful, creating personal connections that went far beyond business discussions. He learned about their families, shared stories about our own relationship, and demonstrated the kind of social intelligence that made clients feel comfortable entrusting their marketing challenges to his professional judgment. I contributed where I could, but it was clear that this was David's element, and that my presence was valuable primarily as evidence of his personal stability, rather than for any direct professional insights I might offer. The conversations touched on business topics occasionally, but the focus was on building relationships and demonstrating character, rather than solving technical problems. By the end of the tournament, David had secured commitments for follow-up meetings, exchanged personal contact information with key decision-makers, and positioned himself as the clear favorite for managing the pharmaceutical account. It was an impressive display of relationship-building skills, and I found myself genuinely proud of his performance, but I also couldn't ignore the cost of my attendance. The federal procurement meeting had been crucial for my own career development, and rescheduling it had created complications that might ultimately cost Whitmore and Associates a significant contract. I'd sacrificed my professional priorities to support David's networking event, and while his success was gratifying, it came at a price that only I would pay. The final event was the elegant dinner at the country club, a formal evening where the pharmaceutical executives would make their final assessment of the Johnson & Associates team before announcing their decision. David spent hours preparing for the dinner, researching each attendee's background, reviewing talking points about the proposed marketing campaign, and even practicing conversations that might arise during the evening. I chose my outfit carefully, a sophisticated black dress that would photograph well if there were formal pictures, jewelry that suggested success without ostentation, and the kind of understated elegance that complemented David's professional image without competing for attention. The dinner itself was a carefully orchestrated affair, with assigned seating that mixed pharmaceutical executives with Johnson & Associates team members and their spouses. I was seated next to the chief financial officer of the pharmaceutical company, a sharp woman in her 50s who'd built her career managing complex financial structures in highly regulated industries. Our conversation began with polite social topics, but quickly evolved into substantive discussions about financial risk management, regulatory compliance, and the accounting challenges that pharmaceutical companies faced when launching new products. She was particularly interested in my experience with forensic accounting and fraud prevention, areas where her company had recently experienced problems that cost them millions in regulatory fines. We've been looking for better ways to integrate financial oversight with our business development processes, she told me during the main course, speaking quietly enough that our conversation wouldn't interrupt the broader table discussion. Too often, we discover compliance problems after marketing campaigns are already in progress, when the costs of correction are enormous. Her comment created an opening for exactly the kind of integrated service offering that I'd mentioned to David after the cocktail party. Forensic accounting techniques could be applied proactively to identify potential compliance issues before they became regulatory problems, saving companies like hers millions in fines while protecting them from the reputational damage that accompanied financial scandals. I explained some of the methodologies that Whitmore & Associates had developed for proactive compliance monitoring, describing cases where our early intervention had prevented problems that could have resulted in criminal charges. The CFO was clearly engaged, asking detailed questions about implementation timelines, cost structures, and the kinds of results that other clients had achieved. But I was also aware that David was monitoring our conversation from across the table, and his expression showed subtle signs of tension. He was clearly pleased that I was making a good impression on an important client, but I could see him calculating whether my professional insights might overshadow his own role in the evening's networking. When the CFO suggested that we schedule a follow-up meeting to discuss potential collaboration between her company and Whitmore Associates, David's smile became noticeably strained. He'd invested months in positioning Johnson & Associates as the pharmaceutical company's marketing partner, and now his wife was potentially introducing a competing service provider into the relationship. "That sounds like a fascinating opportunity," David interjected smoothly, joining our conversation with the practiced ease of someone who'd spent years managing complex client relationships. "Elena's work in forensic accounting is incredibly sophisticated. I'm sure there are ways to coordinate financial oversight with marketing compliance to create really comprehensive solutions for your business challenges." It was a masterful response that acknowledged my expertise while positioning himself as the coordinator who could integrate our respective services. The CFO nodded approvingly, clearly impressed by what appeared to be a husband and wife team that could offer complementary professional capabilities. But I recognized the maneuver for what it was: David's attempt to maintain control over the client relationship, while incorporating my contributions as a subset of his own professional offering. Instead of supporting my independent business development, he was trying to channel my expertise through his existing client management structure. The rest of the dinner proceeded smoothly, with David demonstrating exactly the kind of social and professional competence that made him successful in client relations. He was attentive without being intrusive, knowledgeable without being overwhelming, and charming in ways that made complex business relationships feel like natural friendships. By the end of the evening, it was clear that Johnson & Associates had won the pharmaceutical contract and that David would be promoted to account director within weeks. His success was genuine and well-deserved, reflecting years of hard work and the development of real expertise in relationship management and marketing strategy. But I also knew that my contributions to his success had come at significant personal cost. I'd canceled important meetings, rescheduled client commitments, and missed opportunities for my own business development to support his networking events. The federal contract that I'd delayed for the golf tournament was ultimately awarded to a competitor, costing Whitmore & Associates millions in potential revenue and damaging my reputation with government procurement officials. More troubling was the realization that David expected this pattern to continue indefinitely. His promotion to account director would require even more social obligations, client entertainment, and spousal participation in business development activities. He was already talking about country club memberships, season tickets to sporting events, and the kind of lifestyle investments that would position him for further advancement within Johnson & Associates. None of those plans included consideration of my own career trajectory or acknowledgement that my professional success might require similar investments of time and social capital. David had absorbed the lesson that his career benefited from my support, but he'd never internalized the reciprocal obligation to support my professional development with equal enthusiasm and sacrifice. The pharmaceutical contract was announced 3 weeks later, along with David's promotion to account director and his assignment to lead the expanded client relations team. The celebration party was held at the Grand Metropolitan Hotel, the same venue where our story had begun, though I didn't know that yet. David was genuinely excited about his new role and eager to share his success with colleagues, clients, and the industry contacts who'd supported his career development. The promotion represented everything he'd been working toward for years: increased salary, expanded authority, and recognition as someone capable of managing major accounts and building lasting business relationships. I was proud of his achievement and happy to celebrate his success, but I was also increasingly aware that our marriage had become fundamentally unbalanced. David's career advancement had required significant sacrifices from me, while my own professional development had been consistently subordinated to his networking needs and social obligations. The pattern was unsustainable, but I wasn't yet sure how to address it without seeming ungrateful for his success or petty about the support I'd provided. David's gratitude for my contributions was genuine, and he frequently mentioned how much my presence at business functions had enhanced his professional reputation. But gratitude wasn't the same as reciprocity, and recognition wasn't equivalent to actual support for my own career goals. I needed to find a way to rebalance our relationship that didn't undermine David's recent success, while ensuring that my professional development received equal priority in our future planning. The solution came from an unexpected source: Melissa Chen, David's new executive assistant, who'd been hired specifically to support the expanded client relations team. Melissa was 26 years old, with an MBA from a prestigious business school and impressive credentials in marketing and business development. On paper, she was exactly the kind of professional support that David needed to manage his increased responsibilities effectively. In person, she was something else entirely. Melissa was beautiful in a carefully cultivated way that suggested significant investment in personal appearance and professional image management. Her clothes were expensive and perfectly fitted, her makeup was flawless even during long workdays, and her demeanor combined professional competence with a subtle personal warmth that made her immediately likable to clients and colleagues. More importantly, she understood David's work in ways that I never had. She could discuss marketing strategy with genuine insight, anticipate client needs before they were explicitly stated, and manage the complex logistics of corporate entertainment with effortless efficiency. She was, in many ways, the perfect professional partner for someone in David's position. David mentioned Melissa frequently during his first month in the new role, praising her organizational skills, her client management expertise, and her ability to handle details that allowed him to focus on strategic relationships and business development. His enthusiasm was infectious, and I found myself genuinely pleased that he'd found such capable professional support. Melissa suggested that we restructure the client entertainment budget to focus on smaller, more intimate events rather than large-scale receptions, David told me one evening as he described his day at the office. She thinks that pharmaceutical executives will respond better to personal attention than to generic corporate hospitality. That sounds like smart strategy, I replied, and I meant it. The suggestion demonstrated exactly the kind of industry-specific insight that could differentiate David's approach from more traditional marketing tactics. She's incredibly intuitive about what clients want, David continued, his voice carrying the excitement of someone who'd discovered a valuable professional resource. Today she anticipated that the CFO you met at the dinner would want follow-up information about regulatory compliance, so she prepared a presentation about how our marketing strategies align with FDA requirements. I was impressed despite myself. Melissa had recognized the CFO's interests from our brief dinner conversation and had proactively developed materials that addressed those concerns. It was exactly the kind of strategic thinking that created lasting client relationships and demonstrated real business acumen. But I also noticed that David's descriptions of Melissa's contributions were becoming more frequent and more enthusiastic. He talked about her insights with the kind of admiration that I'd once heard him express about my own professional capabilities, back when my success had enhanced, rather than complicated, his career development. The first warning sign came during a casual conversation about weekend plans. David mentioned that he and Melissa were working on a proposal for expanding the pharmaceutical account into new therapeutic areas, a project that required research into FDA approval processes and regulatory compliance requirements. "We're planning to spend Saturday afternoon at the office going through some technical documentation," he said, his tone suggesting that weekend work was a routine necessity rather than an unusual request. Melissa found some case studies about successful product launches that could inform our strategic recommendations. I looked up from the financial statements I was reviewing for a Monday morning client meeting, suddenly alert to implications that I couldn't quite articulate. "You're working on Saturday? Together?" "It's not unusual for account directors to work weekends when we're developing major proposals," David replied, though his defensive tone suggested that he'd recognized the implications in my question. The pharmaceutical industry is incredibly complex, and we need to understand their business environment before we can create effective marketing strategies. He was right, of course. Senior-level business development often required weekend work, and collaboration between account directors and their executive assistants was entirely normal in professional service firms. But something about the situation felt different, though I couldn't yet identify what was bothering me. "Does Johnson & Associates usually have executives and assistants work alone together on weekends?" I asked, trying to frame my concern as curiosity about office policies rather than personal suspicion. David's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, a subtle change that I might have missed if I hadn't been studying his face for signs of discomfort. We're not working alone. The whole client relations team is collaborating on this proposal. Melissa and I are just handling the regulatory compliance research because she has experience with FDA requirements from her previous job. The explanation was reasonable and probably accurate, but it didn't address the larger pattern I was beginning to notice. David's conversations about work increasingly featured Melissa's contributions, insights, and suggestions. He quoted her observations about client preferences, implemented her recommendations for improving their service offerings, and frequently mentioned how much easier his job had become since she'd joined the team. Individual instances were entirely professional and appropriate, but collectively they suggested a level of collaboration and mutual appreciation that went beyond typical working relationships. David was developing exactly the kind of professional partnership with Melissa that he'd never achieved with me, despite my years of supporting his career development through social events and networking obligations. The irony was obvious and painful. I'd sacrificed my own professional opportunities to help David succeed in client relations, but his actual success was being built through collaboration with someone who understood his work better than I ever could. Melissa could contribute to his business development directly, rather than simply providing social support at networking events. Over the following weeks, I paid closer attention to David's references to his work with Melissa, noting patterns that might indicate whether their professional relationship was evolving into something more personal. The signs were subtle but consistent. Increased enthusiasm when discussing her contributions, more frequent mentions of her insights and suggestions, and a growing tendency to frame business decisions as collaborative efforts rather than individual initiatives. More telling were the changes in David's behavior at home. He was more energetic after work days, more excited about upcoming projects, and more confident about his professional trajectory than I'd seen him in years. His success was genuine and well-deserved, but it was also clearly being driven by a working relationship that provided intellectual stimulation and professional validation in ways that our marriage no longer did. I wasn't yet ready to accuse David of having an affair, partly because I had no concrete evidence, and partly because I wasn't sure I wanted to confront what that evidence might reveal about our relationship. But I was becoming increasingly certain that something fundamental had shifted in his professional life, and that shift was affecting our marriage in ways that neither of us was explicitly acknowledging. The situation reached a tipping point during a conversation about our summer vacation plans. I'd been hoping to schedule a week in Europe, partly for relaxation, and partly because several of my professional contacts had suggested meetings with European forensic accounting firms that could lead to interesting collaborative opportunities. "I'm not sure this is the best time for international travel," David said when I mentioned the possibility. "We're in the middle of expanding the pharmaceutical account, and there are several new prospects that require intensive relationship development. Melissa thinks we should focus on domestic client entertainment until the new contracts are finalized." The casual reference to Melissa's opinion about our personal vacation plans struck me as inappropriate, regardless of whether their working relationship involved romantic complications. David was allowing his executive assistant to influence decisions about our marriage, treating her business judgment as more relevant than my preferences for how we spent our personal time together. "Since when does Melissa have input into our vacation planning?" I asked, keeping my voice level despite the frustration building inside me. David's reaction was immediate and defensive. "She doesn't have input into our vacation planning, but she does have insight into client management timelines and business development priorities. I value her professional judgment about when it's appropriate for me to be out of the office for extended periods." "You've taken vacations before without consulting your assistants about optimal timing," I pointed out. "Why is this different?" "Because my responsibilities are different," David replied, though his tone suggested that he was uncomfortable with the direction of our conversation. "Account directors have obligations that don't exist at lower levels. When you're managing major client relationships, you can't just disappear for a week without considering the impact on business development." His explanation was technically accurate, but it avoided the real issue. David was allowing Melissa to influence personal decisions that should have been made collaboratively between us. Whether or not their relationship involved romantic complications, she was clearly becoming a more important advisor and confidant than I was. That realization led me to a decision that would change everything. I was going to investigate David and Melissa's relationship systematically, documenting any evidence of inappropriate behavior, while also gathering information about how their professional collaboration was affecting our marriage. I wasn't yet planning specific revenge, but I was beginning to understand that I needed insurance against future developments that could threaten my financial security and professional reputation. My investigation began with careful observation of David's communication patterns and work schedule. I noted when he stayed late at the office, tracked his weekend work commitments, and paid attention to how frequently he mentioned Melissa in casual conversation. I also began monitoring his email and phone usage, looking for signs of personal communication that went beyond normal business correspondence. The evidence I gathered was initially ambiguous, but gradually became more concerning. David and Melissa were indeed working closely together on multiple client projects, but their communication patterns suggested a level of personal intimacy that seemed inappropriate for a professional relationship. They exchanged text messages throughout evenings and weekends, often about topics that didn't seem directly related to immediate business needs. More troubling were the changes in David's social media activity. He'd begun posting more photos from work events, and Melissa appeared in many of them, usually standing close to him with expressions that suggested comfort and familiarity. The posts were professionally appropriate, but they documented a developing personal relationship that David had never mentioned explicitly in our conversations about his work. I also noticed changes in David's appearance and personal habits. He was dressing more carefully for work, investing in expensive clothes and accessories that he'd never shown interest in before. He was working out more frequently, paying attention to grooming details that had never concerned him, and generally projecting the image of someone who wanted to make a strong personal impression. The behavioral changes could have been explained by his promotion and increased professional responsibilities, but they also suggested someone who was trying to attract and maintain the attention of a specific person. David was presenting himself as the kind of man who deserved the admiration of an intelligent, attractive, ambitious woman like Melissa. My professional training in forensic accounting proved invaluable for conducting a thorough investigation without alerting David to my suspicions. I was skilled at tracking financial transactions, analyzing communication patterns, and identifying inconsistencies between stated intentions and actual behavior. The same analytical techniques that I used to uncover corporate fraud were entirely applicable to investigating potential marital infidelity. The breakthrough came when I gained access to David's company email account through a security vulnerability that I discovered while helping him troubleshoot a technical problem. I wasn't deliberately trying to hack into his communications, but once I realized I could access his correspondence, I couldn't resist the opportunity to gather definitive evidence about his relationship with Melissa. What I found confirmed my worst suspicions, while also revealing aspects of their relationship that I hadn't anticipated. David and Melissa were indeed having an affair, but it wasn't a simple case of sexual attraction or opportunistic workplace romance. They were developing a genuine professional and personal partnership that offered both of them something they couldn't find in their existing relationships. Their email exchanges revealed extensive discussions about business strategy, client management, and career development that went far beyond the scope of their official working relationship. Melissa was serving as David's strategic advisor, emotional supporter, and intellectual collaborator in ways that made her indispensable to his professional success. But their correspondence also included personal revelations, romantic expressions, and explicit discussions about their frustrations with their existing commitments. David wrote extensively about feeling unappreciated and misunderstood in our marriage, while Melissa shared her own dissatisfactions with a long-term relationship that she described as emotionally unfulfilling. The most damaging emails were those where David discussed me specifically, describing our marriage in terms that were both cruel and revealing. He characterized me as professionally obsessed, emotionally unavailable, and increasingly incompatible with his career goals. He complained that my success made him feel diminished, and that my independence made him feel unnecessary and unappreciated. Reading those emails was devastating, but it was also clarifying. David's affair with Melissa wasn't just about sexual attraction or workplace proximity. It was about finding someone who enhanced rather than complicated his professional aspirations, someone who understood his work environment and could contribute directly to his business success. Melissa represented everything that David wanted in a partner: professional competence, personal attractiveness, and complete alignment with his career priorities. She could attend business functions as a genuine contributor rather than supportive spouse, discuss client strategies with real insight rather than polite interest, and advance her own career through collaboration rather than sacrifice. The contrast with our marriage was stark and painful. I had sacrificed my professional opportunities to support David's networking needs, but Melissa was building her career by working with him. I had provided social support at business events, but Melissa provided strategic input that directly influenced client relationships. I had tried to balance my career with his needs, but Melissa had made his career advancement her primary professional focus. The emails also revealed that David and Melissa were planning to formalize their relationship once their respective personal situations could be resolved. They discussed timeline for ending their current commitments, strategies for minimizing professional complications, and shared fantasies about building a life together that integrated their personal and professional goals. David was planning to ask me for a divorce within the next few months, timing the conversation to coincide with the completion of several major client projects that would establish his reputation as an account director. He wanted to ensure that personal disruptions wouldn't interfere with his professional momentum, treating our marriage as a business obligation that needed to be managed strategically rather than an emotional relationship that deserved honest communication. Melissa, meanwhile, was planning to break up with her long-term boyfriend and position herself for promotion within Johnson & Associates. She'd been promised a senior role in the client relations team, contingent on the successful completion of the pharmaceutical contract and the expansion of their service offerings into new therapeutic areas. Their plans were sophisticated, carefully considered, and utterly selfish. Both of them were treating their existing relationships as obstacles to overcome rather than commitments to honor, and both were confident that their professional success justified the personal damage they were planning to inflict on people who trusted them. Reading their correspondence filled me with rage, but it also provided me with exactly the information I needed to protect myself and plan my own strategic response. David thought he was managing our marriage while building his future with Melissa, but he had no idea that I was documenting his betrayal and preparing to use his own tactics against him. I spent the next month gathering additional evidence while maintaining the facade of an unsuspecting wife who remained committed to supporting David's career development. I attended business functions where I could observe his interactions with Melissa, collected documentation about their working relationship, and carefully monitored their communications for information about their future plans. The evidence I gathered was comprehensive and damaging. I had emails proving their affair, photographs documenting their intimacy at professional events, and financial records showing that David was using company resources to fund personal activities with Melissa. I also had detailed information about their professional collaboration, including documents that revealed how much of David's recent success was actually the result of Melissa's strategic insights and business development efforts. But more importantly, I was developing a plan that would expose their relationship while protecting my own interests and career prospects. David and Melissa thought they were managing their professional and personal transitions strategically, but they were both vulnerable to exactly the kind of calculated exposure that could destroy their carefully constructed plans. The key was timing. David's promotion to account director had made him more visible within Johnson & Associates, but it had also made him more vulnerable to scandal. His success with the pharmaceutical account was impressive, but it was also dependent on maintaining client confidence and professional credibility. A public revelation of his affair with his executive assistant could damage his reputation and compromise his ability to manage major client relationships. Melissa was even more vulnerable. As David's subordinate, she was at risk of being perceived as someone who had advanced her career through inappropriate relationships, rather than professional competence. Her promotion to the senior client relations role was contingent on maintaining the respect of colleagues and clients who might question her judgment and ethics if her affair with David became public knowledge. I also realized that their affair had created professional conflicts of interest that could expose Johnson & Associates to legal and financial liability. David was in a position to influence Melissa's compensation, performance evaluations, and career advancement, while she was providing him with strategic advice and business development support that went beyond her official responsibilities. Their relationship violated company policies about workplace relationships, created potential conflicts of interest in client management, and exposed the firm to allegations of favoritism and discrimination. If their affair became public, Johnson & Associates would be forced to take disciplinary action that could damage both of their careers while also protecting the company from legal exposure. The plan I developed was simple, elegant, and devastating. I would expose David and Melissa's affair at the promotion party, using the public setting and professional audience to maximize the damage to their reputations, while minimizing their ability to control the narrative or limit the consequences. The promotion party was scheduled for a Friday evening at the Grand Metropolitan Hotel, the same venue where David had successfully networked with pharmaceutical executives months earlier. The event would be attended by Johnson & Associates leadership, major clients, and industry contacts who could influence David and Melissa's future career prospects. I would attend the party as David's supportive wife, maintaining my facade until the perfect moment for revelation. When Melissa inevitably tried to assert her importance by introducing me as David's ex-wife, or making some other dismissive comment about my role in his life, I would respond by revealing her actual status as his affair partner, and documenting the professional misconduct that had enabled their relationship. The beauty of the plan was that it used David and Melissa's own arrogance and carelessness against them. They were so confident in their ability to manage their professional transition that they'd become sloppy about maintaining appropriate boundaries in public settings. Their affair was already visible to observant colleagues. I was simply planning to make it impossible to ignore or deny. More importantly, the exposure would occur in a professional context, where the consequences would be immediate and severe. David's reputation with clients would be damaged, Melissa's credibility would be destroyed, and Johnson & Associates would be forced to take action that could end both of their careers. I spent the weeks leading up to the promotion party, refining my strategy and gathering final pieces of evidence. I documented David's use of company resources for personal activities with Melissa, collected additional examples of their inappropriate workplace behavior, and prepared materials that would demonstrate the extent of their professional misconduct. I also began making subtle preparations for the aftermath of my revelation. I consulted with divorce attorneys about protecting my financial interests, spoke with colleagues about potential job opportunities that wouldn't involve David's professional network, and made sure that my own career would be insulated from any damage that might result from the public exposure of our marriage problems. The irony wasn't lost on me. David had spent months planning his transition away from our marriage while using my support to advance his career. Now I was planning my own transition while using his trust to gather the evidence that would destroy his professional prospects. The difference was that David's plan involved betraying someone who had sacrificed her own career advancement to support his success, while my plan involved exposing someone who had betrayed the trust and loyalty I demonstrated for years. David was using deception to abandon his commitments, while I was using truth to enforce consequences for his dishonesty. As the promotion party approached, I felt a mixture of anticipation and sadness. I was excited about the prospect of finally holding David accountable for his selfish behavior, but I was also mourning the end of a marriage that had once represented genuine partnership and mutual support. The man I'd fallen in love with 4 years earlier would never have planned to abandon his wife while using her social support to advance his career. That man had been capable of genuine appreciation for my achievements and authentic commitment to our shared future. But that man had apparently been replaced by someone who viewed our marriage as a professional asset to be managed strategically, rather than an emotional relationship to be treasured and protected. David had become someone who could plan to destroy our life together while continuing to benefit from my loyalty and support. The transformation was complete, and so was my preparation for responding to it. The promotion party would be David's moment of professional triumph and personal revelation. He would celebrate his career success while discovering that his personal betrayals had been documented and would have consequences he'd never anticipated. Melissa would learn that introducing herself as David's professional partner while dismissing me as his ex-wife would result in her own exposure as a former employee whose career advancement had been based on ethical violations rather than professional competence. And I would finally have the satisfaction of demonstrating that underestimating my intelligence and treating my support as an entitlement was the biggest mistake David had ever made in his professional or personal life. The stage was set, the evidence was gathered, and the perfect moment for justice was less than 24 hours away. The Grand Metropolitan Hotel buzzed with the kind of sophisticated energy that accompanied successful business celebrations. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over elegantly dressed professionals, who moved through the ballroom with practiced ease, their conversations a carefully orchestrated blend of congratulations, networking, and strategic relationship building. The pharmaceutical executives were there, along with Johnson & Associates leadership, industry contacts, and the kind of influential people who could make or break careers with casual recommendations. I arrived fashionably late, wearing a stunning emerald dress that David had never seen before. I'd chosen it specifically for this evening, something that would photograph beautifully when the inevitable pictures were taken, but more importantly, something that would command attention when I needed it most. The dress was expensive enough to signal success, but elegant enough to maintain professional credibility, exactly the kind of calculated choice that David would appreciate if he weren't about to learn how thoroughly I'd calculated everything else. David spotted me immediately as I entered the ballroom, his face lighting up with genuine pleasure and pride. He looked handsome in his perfectly tailored suit, radiating the confidence of someone who'd finally achieved the professional recognition he'd been pursuing for years. For a moment, I felt a pang of genuine sadness for what we'd once been together, before his betrayal had poisoned everything between us. "Elena, you look absolutely stunning," he said as he approached, kissing my cheek with the kind of affectionate warmth that would have been convincing to anyone who didn't know about his affair. "I'm so glad you could make it. There are several people I want you to meet, including some potential contacts for your forensic accounting work." The thoughtfulness of his comment would have been touching if I hadn't known that he was planning to divorce me within weeks. David was still playing the role of supportive husband, using my professional accomplishments to enhance his own reputation while privately planning to abandon our marriage for his relationship with Melissa. "Thank you," I replied, accepting a glass of champagne from a passing server. "Congratulations on everything you've achieved. I know how much this promotion means to you." David beamed with satisfaction, interpreting my words as admiration rather than the careful preparation they actually represented. He spent the next 20 minutes introducing me to various colleagues and clients, presenting me as his accomplished wife, while carefully managing our interactions to ensure that I enhanced rather than overshadowed his own professional image. I played my part perfectly, demonstrating just enough expertise to be impressive while deferring to David's leadership on all business matters. I made the kind of sophisticated small talk that reflected well on his judgment in choosing a successful spouse, asked insightful questions that showed I understood the complexity of his work, and generally served as the ideal professional partner that his career advancement required. But I was also scanning the room for Melissa, curious to observe how she would navigate the evening, and whether she would make the mistake I was anticipating. I spotted her near the bar, surrounded by a small group of colleagues who were clearly enjoying her company. She looked radiant in a way that went beyond professional success, glowing with the kind of happiness that came from having everything she wanted finally within reach. Melissa was wearing a black cocktail dress that managed to be both sophisticated and subtly seductive, walking the fine line between professional appropriate and personally attractive. Her jewelry was expensive but tasteful, her makeup was flawless, and her entire appearance projected the image of someone who belonged in elegant settings like this one. More telling was her body language and the way she moved through the room. Melissa carried herself with the confidence of someone who felt secure in her position and certain about her future. She was networking actively, building relationships with clients and colleagues who could support her anticipated promotion to senior roles within the client relations team. I watched her interactions carefully, noting how she positioned herself in conversations and whether she showed any signs of nervousness about maintaining appropriate boundaries with David in such a public setting. What I observed confirmed my assessment of her character. Melissa was sophisticated enough to maintain professional decorum in front of colleagues, while also confident enough to believe that she could manage any complications that might arise from her affair with David. The first direct interaction came when David brought me over to join a conversation that included several pharmaceutical executives and members of the Johnson & Associates leadership team. Melissa was part of the group, contributing strategic insights about market positioning and regulatory compliance that demonstrated her genuine expertise in business development. Elena, I'd like you to meet Melissa Chen, my executive assistant, David said, his tone carefully neutral despite the intimate relationship I knew they shared. Melissa has been instrumental in developing our expanded service offerings for the pharmaceutical industry. It's wonderful to meet you, Melissa replied, extending her hand with a smile that appeared genuine but carried subtle undertones that I recognized as territorial marking. David speaks about you frequently. He's incredibly proud of your success in forensic accounting. The exchange was perfectly professional on the surface, but I could sense the complex dynamics underneath. Melissa was assessing me as competition for David's attention and loyalty, while also demonstrating her own importance in his professional life. She was confident enough in their relationship to be gracious to me, but secure enough in her position to subtly assert her significance in David's daily work experience. I responded with equal grace and subtle assertion, acknowledging her professional contributions while making it clear that I wasn't intimidated by her presence in David's work life. Thank you. David has mentioned how valuable your insights have been for the pharmaceutical account. It's impressive how quickly you've mastered such complex regulatory requirements. The conversation continued for several minutes, with Melissa demonstrating exactly the kind of sophisticated business acumen that had made her indispensable to David's success. She discussed FDA compliance issues with authority, analyzed market trends with genuine insight, and projected the kind of professional competence that impressed clients and colleagues alike. But she also made subtle references to her close working relationship with David, mentioning projects they'd developed together, strategies they'd implemented collaboratively, and shared successes that positioned them as a professional team. The references were appropriate in a business context, but they also served to establish her importance in David's career in ways that went beyond traditional assistant responsibilities. I filed away each comment for future reference while maintaining my role as the supportive spouse who was genuinely impressed by her husband's professional partnerships. But I was also waiting for the moment when Melissa would overreach, when her confidence in her position would lead her to make the kind of mistake that would create the opening I needed. That moment came during a conversation with Thomas Richardson, the CEO of Johnson & Associates, who was making rounds to personally congratulate David and acknowledge the key team members who'd contributed to the pharmaceutical contract success. Richardson was exactly the kind of influential executive who could accelerate or destroy careers with casual comments, making him the perfect audience for what was about to unfold. David, congratulations again on the exceptional results with the pharmaceutical account, Richardson said, raising his glass in a toast. The client feedback has been outstanding, and the expansion opportunities they've identified could triple our revenue in that sector within 2 years. Thank you, Tom, David replied, clearly energized by the recognition from his CEO. I'm fortunate to have such a strong team supporting this work. Melissa's strategic insights have been particularly valuable for understanding the regulatory environment and compliance requirements. Richardson turned to acknowledge Melissa directly, his expression showing genuine appreciation for her contributions. Ms. Chen, David's told me about your innovative approaches to client relations. The integration of compliance consulting with traditional marketing services was brilliant strategy. Melissa practically glowed under the CEO's praise, her confidence reaching levels that would prove to be her downfall. Thank you, Mr. Richardson. David and I work very well together. We've developed such an effective partnership that I sometimes feel like we're practically married to our work. The comment was clearly meant as a professional metaphor, but it was also a subtle assertion of her intimate working relationship with David. More importantly, it created the opening for Richardson to acknowledge our actual marriage, which would in turn create the opportunity for Melissa to make the crucial mistake I'd been anticipating. Well, you're fortunate to have such understanding spouses, Richardson said, glancing at me with the kind of inclusive gesture that experienced executives use to ensure that everyone felt acknowledged in group conversations. Mrs. Watson, you must be proud of the partnership your husband has built with Ms. Chen. This kind of collaboration is exactly what drives exceptional client results. Actually, Melissa interjected before I could respond, her voice carrying just enough authority to redirect the conversation back to her professional relationship with David. I should clarify something. Elena is David's ex-wife. They're divorced, though they maintain a friendly relationship for professional networking purposes. The lie was so audacious and perfectly delivered that for a moment, everyone in the conversation simply accepted it as fact. Richardson nodded politely, interpreting the supposed divorce as an explanation for why I was attending David's professional celebration despite no longer being married to him. Several other colleagues absorbed the information without question, filing it away as personal background that explained the social dynamics they were observing. But I felt something cold and predatory settle in my chest as I realized that Melissa had just provided me with exactly the opening I'd been waiting for. She'd been so confident in her position, and so eager to establish her primacy in David's life, that she'd essentially erased me from his personal history in front of his CEO and major clients. The moment stretched out as I considered my response, calculating exactly how to maximize the damage while maintaining perfect professional decorum. David's face had gone pale as he processed what Melissa had just said, finally understanding that their affair was about to be exposed in the worst possible way, in front of the most important people in his professional life. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice carrying clearly across the suddenly quiet conversation, my tone perfectly calibrated to suggest confusion rather than anger. "I believe there's been a misunderstanding. David and I are very much married. We celebrated our 4th wedding anniversary last month." The silence that followed was absolute and devastating. Richardson's expression shifted from polite interest to sharp attention as he processed the implications of what he'd just witnessed. The pharmaceutical executives exchanged glances that suggested they were rapidly reassessing their understanding of the Johnson & Associates team dynamics. Other colleagues who'd overheard the exchange began paying closer attention to a conversation that had suddenly become much more interesting than routine business networking. Melissa's face cycled through a series of expressions as she realized the magnitude of her mistake. Confusion gave way to panic as she understood that she'd just publicly claimed that David was divorced when he was clearly still married, in front of people who could destroy both of their careers with a single conversation. "I think," I continued, still maintaining my tone of helpful clarification rather than accusation, "that you're thinking of your own employment status, Melissa. As of Monday morning, you'll be the former employee." The impact was immediate and catastrophic. Richardson's expression shifted to barely contained anger as he processed the full implications of what he was witnessing. A married executive and his subordinate assistant had been conducting an affair serious enough that she felt comfortable publicly claiming he was divorced, while attending a company celebration as his professional partner. The pharmaceutical executives were clearly uncomfortable with the personal drama unfolding in front of them, but they were also taking mental notes about the kind of people they were trusting with their marketing contracts. Several other Johnson & Associates colleagues had gravitated toward our conversation, drawn by the tension and beginning to understand that they were witnessing a career-ending scandal. David was frozen in place, his champagne glass halfway to his lips, his face cycling between mortification and desperate calculation as he tried to figure out how to minimize the damage from Melissa's catastrophic mistake. But there was no recovery possible from what had just happened. His affair had been exposed in the most public and professionally damaging way imaginable. Melissa recovered first, her survival instincts kicking in as she attempted damage control. "I apologize for the confusion," she said, her voice strained but professional. "I misspoke about Elena's relationship status. I was thinking of someone else entirely." But the damage was irreversible. Richardson was already making mental notes about disciplinary action. The pharmaceutical executives were questioning the judgment and professionalism of the team they'd entrusted with their account, and colleagues throughout the room were beginning to understand that they'd just witnessed a spectacular implosion of professional boundaries and personal ethics. "No confusion at all," I replied graciously, my smile never wavering as I delivered the final blow. "Though I understand how David's personal relationships might be difficult to track these days. It's challenging when professional boundaries become so blurred that assistants begin to feel like family members." The implication was crystal clear to everyone present. David and Melissa had been conducting an affair that had progressed to the point where she felt entitled to speak as his primary partner, while he had been using company resources and professional settings to facilitate their relationship. Richardson set down his glass with deliberate precision, his CEO instincts taking over as he recognized a situation that required immediate damage control. David, Melissa, I think we should schedule a meeting first thing Monday morning to discuss some administrative matters. The phrase administrative matters was corporate euphemism for disciplinary action that would likely result in termination for both of them. Richardson couldn't fire them at a client celebration, but he was making it clear that their employment at Johnson & Associates would be ending very soon. The pharmaceutical executives were already beginning to distance themselves from the conversation, clearly uncomfortable with the personal drama, and questioning whether Johnson & Associates maintained the kind of professional standards they expected from their marketing partners. The scandal wasn't just damaging David and Melissa's careers, it was potentially compromising the entire account that had been the foundation of David's recent success. Word of the confrontation spread through the ballroom with the speed that only truly shocking revelations could achieve. Within minutes, everyone at the party knew that David Watson had been conducting an affair with his executive assistant, that she'd been brazen enough to claim he was divorced at a company celebration, and that his actual wife had exposed their relationship in front of the CEO and major clients. I spent the rest of the evening graciously accepting condolences and quietly documenting reactions for future reference. Colleagues who'd previously treated me as David's supporting character were suddenly very interested in my professional background and expertise. Clients who'd seen me only as a networking asset were asking serious questions about my forensic accounting capabilities. Most satisfying were the conversations with other spouses who'd attended the celebration, several of whom made pointed comments about the importance of loyalty and professional integrity. The wives of other executives were particularly vocal in their support, recognizing that David's behavior represented exactly the kind of betrayal that threatened all professional marriages. David spent the remainder of the party attempting damage control that was doomed to failure. He tried to explain the situation to Richardson, but there was no explanation that could justify his conduct or minimize the professional implications. He attempted to reassure the pharmaceutical executives about the stability of their account management, but they were clearly questioning whether someone who showed such poor judgment in personal matters could be trusted with their business relationships. Melissa left the party early, her exit as strategic as everything else she'd done throughout the affair. She recognized that her career at Johnson & Associates was over, and that her best option was to begin planning her next professional move rather than prolonging the public humiliation. But her departure only emphasized the extent of the damage she'd caused. Her absence made it impossible for David to present their relationship as a professional partnership rather than a personal affair, and it left him alone to face the consequences of their shared misconduct. I stayed until the very end of the celebration, maintaining my role as the gracious wife who'd handled an impossible situation with dignity and class. I accepted business cards from potential clients, scheduled follow-up meetings with colleagues who were impressed by my professional composure under pressure, and generally turned David's career catastrophe into networking opportunities for my own business development. The drive home was conducted in complete silence. David knew that anything he said would only make his situation worse, and I was content to let him process the full magnitude of what had just occurred. His affair had been exposed, his professional reputation was destroyed, and his career prospects had evaporated in a single evening. But more importantly, he'd finally learned the cost of underestimating someone he'd treated as a supporting character in his own ambition story. For years, he'd benefited from my professional support while planning to abandon our marriage for someone who could enhance his career more directly. Now he would discover what it felt like to lose everything while the person he'd betrayed emerged stronger and more successful than ever. The aftermath unfolded exactly as I'd anticipated. David and Melissa were both terminated from Johnson & Associates the following Monday, their dismissals officially attributed to violations of company policy regarding workplace relationships and conflicts of interest. Richardson had acted swiftly to protect the firm from legal liability and client backlash, making it clear that their conduct had been incompatible with professional standards. The pharmaceutical contract was reassigned to another account director, though the clients expressed concerns about stability and judgment that would affect Johnson & Associates' relationship with them for years to come. David's termination was structured as resignation to avoid wrongful dismissal claims, but the industry gossip about the circumstances made him virtually unemployable at other major marketing firms. Melissa faced even worse consequences. Her reputation as someone who'd advanced her career through inappropriate relationships made it impossible for her to find comparable positions elsewhere. The executive assistant, market was small and interconnected, and word about her conduct had spread throughout the professional networks that would have provided her next opportunities. I filed for divorce immediately, citing adultery and requesting assets distribution that reflected my contributions to David's career development over 4 years of marriage. The prenuptial agreement that he'd insisted upon protected my separate property while leaving him with exactly what he'd brought to our relationship, which was considerably less than he'd anticipated. More satisfying was the response from my own professional network. Colleagues who'd witnessed my handling of the promotion party situation were impressed by my composure and strategic thinking under pressure. Several new business opportunities emerged from contacts who appreciated my analytical approach to complex problems and my ability to manage difficult situations with professional grace. The forensic accounting division at Whitmore Associates benefited significantly from the publicity, as potential clients recognized that someone who could uncover a sophisticated affair might also be capable of detecting more traditional forms of financial misconduct. My reputation for thorough investigation and strategic problem-solving opened doors that had been closed when I was known primarily as David Watson's supportive wife. 6 months later, I was promoted to managing partner of the Forensic Accounting Division, with responsibility for expanding our services into corporate intelligence and risk management. The promotion came with a significant salary increase, equity participation, and the kind of professional recognition that David had been pursuing unsuccessfully for years. The irony wasn't lost on me. David's betrayal had freed me from the obligation to subordinate my career to his networking needs, allowing me to pursue opportunities that I'd been sacrificing for his benefit. His affair with Melissa had ended his professional prospects while accelerating my own advancement in ways that would have been impossible if our marriage had continued. A year after the promotion party, I received an invitation to speak at a national conference on forensic accounting innovations. The keynote address would be attended by FBI agents, federal prosecutors, and corporate executives who were responsible for preventing financial crimes in major organizations. As I prepared my presentation, I reflected on the strange journey that had brought me to this moment of professional triumph. 3 years earlier, I'd been a successful but subordinate partner in a marriage that required constant sacrifice of my own ambitions for David's career development. Now I was a nationally recognized expert in my field, with professional opportunities that reflected my actual capabilities rather than my willingness to serve as someone else's supporting character. David's betrayal had been devastating personally, but it had also been liberating professionally in ways that I was still discovering. The promotion party had been his moment of apparent triumph and my moment of perfect revenge. But the real victory hadn't been exposing his affair or destroying his career prospects. The real victory had been reclaiming my own professional identity and building something that belonged entirely to me. Sometimes the best revenge isn't about destroying your enemies. Sometimes it's about proving that their betrayal was the best thing that ever happened to you, even when they were too short-sighted to realize what they were giving up. David had wanted a wife who would enhance his career without competing for attention or recognition. He'd found that in Melissa, at least temporarily, but he'd lost someone whose actual capabilities exceeded anything either of them could achieve individually. That was a lesson he'd learned too late to matter, but it was a lesson I'd carry forward into whatever challenges and opportunities lay ahead. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.